The oldest maps that survive to the modern age carry a warning at their edges. Written in Latin, 4 words: Hic sunt dracones. Here be dragons. The cartographers who added this phrase were not filling blank space with superstition. They were recording the one warning that every person on Earth, regardless of language or place of origin, already understood without requiring any explanation. Every sailor reading that map knew what it meant. Every merchant crossing continents with it in hand knew what it meant. Nobody ever asked what a dragon was. That is what should give you pause. Long before printing presses connected ideas across continents, before ocean voyages linked the Eastern and Western worlds, before any documented cultural exchange passed between the great civilizations of the ancient world, people on opposite sides of the planet were describing the same creature with striking consistency. Not as a side story, as the central organizing force of their entire understanding of the world. 3,000 years ago, Chinese scribes of the Shang dynasty engraved enormous water serpents onto bronze ritual vessels. These serpents controlled rain, floods, and whether entire populations survived. On the other side of the Pacific, the Aztec civilization built one of their most sacred temples to Quetzalcoatl, a feathered serpent deity whose name was so powerful that the collapse of empires was attributed to his anger. In ancient Babylon, the oldest surviving creation myth in the written record begins with a serpent goddess named Tiamat, whose destroyed body forms the sky and the earth. And in Australia, Aboriginal communities with some of the oldest continuous oral traditions on the planet spoke of a rainbow serpent so vast that its movement across the land carved every river and mountain range into existence. None of these peoples had any contact with one another. Not one trade route connects them. Not one shared language. Not a single documented exchange in the ancient record. Yet every one of them placed the same enormous serpent at the center of the world. This is not a coincidence. It is a question. And the answer goes back further than any city, any civilization, any written word. It goes back to a time when human beings had no words at all for what they already feared. The first answer to why dragons appear in every culture on Earth is not cultural, it is biological. It is built into the physical structure of every human brain alive today, and it has been there far longer than any civilization has existed. 66 million years ago, an asteroid struck the Earth with a force that triggered continent-wide firestorms, pushed enormous volumes of debris into the atmosphere, and blocked sunlight for years. Over 75% of all species alive at that moment ceased to exist, including every large predatory reptile that had dominated land ecosystems for hundreds of millions of years before. The world that survived was emptier than anything that had come before, and into that emptied world, mammals, which had come through the catastrophe by hiding underground and in small burrows, began spreading into every available ecosystem for the first time. But one predator had survived the extinction alongside them. Snakes existed long before the asteroid fell, and they came through the catastrophe without disappearing. As mammals moved into new territories, snakes were already there in enormous numbers, and some of them reached sizes that no living snake approaches today. Constrictor species were active predators in the early mammalian world, camouflaged, patient, and capable of killing prey far larger than themselves. They had been hunting warm-blooded animals for tens of millions of years. The mammals that lived long enough to reproduce were, more often than not, the ones who spotted snakes first. Evolutionary biologist Lynn Isbell published research beginning in 2006 proposing a hypothesis that has since accumulated substantial scientific support. The visual system of primates evolved, in large part, as a response to the threat of snake predation. Color vision, three-dimensional depth perception, and the ability to distinguish fine detail in visually complex environments. The features that define primate sight and separate it from that of most other mammals. developed under evolutionary pressure specifically because spotting a camouflaged snake in time was a matter of survival. The primates who could detect a brown-patterned body coiled in brown-patterned undergrowth survived at higher rates. Their offspring inherited sharper vision. Over millions of generations, the entire visual architecture of the primate lineage was refined around this single challenge. The reason you see the world in full color may be that your most distant ancestors needed to find snakes before those snakes found them. The brain did not stop at the eye. Decades of controlled psychological research have established a consistent and replicable pattern. Human beings detect snakes faster than they detect any other category of object or living thing. Not slightly faster, measurably, significantly faster. The detection happens before conscious awareness. The brain identifies snake and begins a fear response before the thinking mind has finished processing what the eyes are looking at. This has been demonstrated in infants as young as 6 months, who have never encountered a snake and were never taught to fear one. When shown images of snakes alongside images of other animals, those infants show measurably elevated stress responses to the snake images. The fear is not learned from experience, it is present from birth. One additional element ties this directly to the mythology. Human beings consistently and measurably overestimate the size and proximity of snakes. This is not a perceptual error, it is a calibrated feature of a threat detection system shaped by millions of years of survival pressure. The organisms that slightly over-responded to potential danger survived at higher rates than those who calibrated their response too precisely. So the brain amplifies. It makes snakes larger than they are, brings them closer than they are, registers them as more urgent than they may be. And stories about the most frightening experiences get remembered and repeated at far higher rates than calm ones. Combine those 3 elements. A visual system built to detect snakes specifically, before conscious thought engages. A perception system that makes snakes feel larger and more dangerous than objective measurement would confirm. And a storytelling tradition shared by every human culture, in which frightening stories are preserved and amplified across generations. All 3 are operating simultaneously every time a person encounters a snake, and every time someone tells a story about one. The dragon is what happens when those 3 forces work together across thousands of generations of telling and retelling. The Western dragon, the winged, 4-legged, fire-breathing version most familiar to audiences today, takes this one step further. Some researchers have proposed that it represents a composite of the 3 greatest predatory threats faced by prehistoric human ancestors: the serpent, the large bird of prey, and the great cat. The body of a snake, the wings and talons of an eagle, the teeth, jaw, and aggression of a lion or similar apex predator. 3 sources of mortal danger merged into a single creature that concentrates every inherited fear into one form. A universal monster built from the parts of actual universal threats. Evolution explains why every culture feared serpents and produced lasting stories about them. What it does not explain is why those stories contain such specific and consistent details. Why dragons breathe fire, why they live in rivers and underground, why a Chinese dragon has antlers that no European dragon possesses. For those specifics, the explanation lies in something more tangible. It lies in what ancient people found when they dug into the ground, and in what they witnessed when the ground itself began to burn. In the summer of 2002, a fossilized skull was found eroding from a cliff face in the Gobi Desert. The skull belonged to Protoceratops, a prehistoric animal roughly the size of a large sheep that had lived in that region approximately 75 million years earlier. It had 4 distinct leg socket structures, a massive hooked beak curving sharply downward like an eagle's, and a wide bony frill around the back of its neck that an untrained eye could plausibly mistake for folded wings or a raised mane. The skull was in near-perfect condition, preserved in dry sediment for tens of millions of years, and left exposed by natural erosion. Exactly as thousands of travelers would have found similar specimens for millennia along the trade routes passing through that region. Ancient Greek writers described a creature called the griffin, half eagle, half lion, said to guard enormous gold deposits in the mountains north of Scythia, the name used in antiquity for the territory of Central Asia. The Gobi Desert sits directly within that geographic zone. It is simultaneously one of the world's most productive fossil sites and a region historically associated with gold deposits along those same ancient caravan routes. Researcher Adrian Mayer, whose 2001 book documented the connections between fossil discovery and ancient mythology, mapped the correspondence between naturally exposed Protoceratops skulls and classical griffin descriptions in considerable detail. The people who traveled through that region found these skulls emerging from cliff faces and concluded they had discovered the remains of a gold-guarding monster were making a rational inference from the evidence available to them. This field of research carries the name geomythology, the systematic study of connections between the physical geological features of a region and the myths that originated there. Its foundational argument is both simple and powerful. Myths are not pure fabrications. They frequently function as compressed, durable records of genuine observations about the natural world, transmitted in narrative form because narrative is the most reliable long-term memory format available without writing. The evidence for this principle extends far beyond dragons. In Central Australia, oral traditions of the Archaeology people preserved a story about fire falling from the sky into a water hole at a specific named location. Scientists who investigated the site described in the story found a previously uncharted meteor impact crater in the Finke Gorge region. The story had preserved an accurate record of a real astronomical event for an estimated 10,000 years, with no written documentation, no maps, no instrumentation, only spoken words passed from one generation to the next. Dragon myths follow the same principle, and the specific visual details embedded in each regional tradition correspond with striking precision to the specific fossil types found in those same regions. Northern China is the geographic heart of Chinese dragon mythology. It is also one of the world's most abundant sites for Pliocene-era fossils, including the skeletal remains of ancient large deer species with massive, multi-branching antlers. Chinese dragons are the only dragon tradition in the world that consistently depicts these creatures with antlers. No European dragon tradition features antlers. No Mesoamerican serpent deity bears them. Antlers appear exclusively in the mythological tradition, whose homeland contains the specific fossil record that displays them. The correspondence is not approximate, it is specific. In the mountainous regions of South Asia, including areas of what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, regional traditions describe serpents adorned with glittering or jeweled crests. Fossil specimens from the Siwalik Hills region include bone material with embedded mineral deposits that create reflective surfaces on naturally weathered specimens, something that would genuinely catch light when found in the field. Different details in different places, constructed by different peoples examining different physical evidence from the ground beneath them. Fire breathing is the detail that most sharply distinguishes the dragon from every other cross-cultural mythological creature. Nothing else breathes fire in the same persistent, universal way. Its geographic origin becomes clear when the geology of the Mediterranean world is examined. At a site in southern Turkey called Yanarta, Turkish for burning rock, natural methane vents have been releasing flames directly from the Earth's surface for at least 2,000 years of documented observation, and almost certainly far longer. The flames emerge from fractures in the rock, fed by deep geological gas deposits. They resist extinguishing with water. In darkness, they burn with a distinctly blue color. Ancient Greek writers identified this precise site as the dwelling place of the Chimera, a hybrid fire-breathing creature killed by the hero Bellerophon, who forced molten lead into its throat and sealed the fire within. The story is a direct mythological encoding of a real geological observation. Something beneath the surface produces fire without any visible fuel. If the opening is sealed, the fire stops. The lead in the throat detail is a narrative translation of what occurs when a gas vent is blocked. Comparable methane vents and volcanic gas features are documented across the broader region, precisely the zones where fire-breathing serpent mythology is most concentrated and most elaborated. The geography of the myth tracks the geology beneath it. What emerges from geomythology is a picture in which the dragon was never a single invention. It was continuously assembled. Each culture received an ancient foundational story and rebuilt it, incorporating the fossils eroding from their local hillsides, the fires burning from their local earth, the floods and storms their local geography produced. The result was dozens of distinct dragons, all rooted in the same story, each reflecting the specific world of the people who told it. The question that remains is where that foundational story came from. Which brings us to a cave in southern Africa, to people who were telling stories about a giant serpent before any of the civilizations that later built dragons had yet appeared. In 2006, an archaeologist named Sheila Coulson made a discovery in the Sodilo Hills of Botswana that shifted the accepted timeline of human religious behavior. Deep inside one of those hills, her team found a massive natural rock formation that had been deliberately worked by human hands. The stone formation is approximately 6 meters in length. Carved notches and grooves cut across its surface create the unmistakable profile of an enormous coiled snake. Around 300 stone tools were recovered from the site, arranged in a spatial pattern consistent with organized ritual activity rather than casual use or random deposition. Traces of ochre pigment, a substance associated almost universally with human ceremonial practice across every culture that has used it, were found nearby. The site dated to at least 70,000 years ago. To understand what that number means, consider the following. The oldest known cave paintings in Europe are approximately 45,000 years old. The earliest written records in any human civilization are around 5,000 years old. Agriculture, the foundation that made the first cities possible, began roughly 12,000 years ago. The Great Pyramid of Giza, which most people understand as almost incomprehensibly ancient, is about 4,500 years old. At 70,000 years, the carved snake in the Sodilo Hills predates all of these by margins that are difficult to fully absorb. The people who performed ceremonies there had no writing, no agriculture, no permanent structures. They lived in small mobile groups in a world that was almost entirely unknown, and they were already organizing communal rituals around a giant stone serpent. The oral traditions of the San people of southern Africa, one of the oldest continuously maintained cultural lineages on Earth, have long connected this serpent to one specific force: rain. The python of the Sodilo Hills controls water. Its movements determine whether rain falls from the sky and whether the land supports life. This serpent is not an enemy to be fought. It is not a monster to be feared from a distance. It is a source, the source of everything the ecosystem depends on, a force to be honored and approached with care. This is the oldest confirmed evidence of organized human ritual involving a serpent creature anywhere in the archaeological record. And the specific nature of that relationship, serpent as water giver, as rain controller, as the force governing whether life continues, appears in dragon and serpent traditions from every region of the world that humans subsequently reached. The second line of evidence comes from a field called statistical phylogenetics. The same mathematical tools used in genetics to trace evolutionary relationships between species have been applied to mythology by researchers including Julien Duhuy of the French National Center for Scientific Research. The methodology identifies shared structural elements across myths from different cultures, calculates the statistical likelihood of independent origin versus shared ancestry, and maps the results as a branching family tree, the same logic used to determine the common ancestor of related species. When the myth of a great serpent connected to water is traced backward through this analysis, every branch of the tree converges on a single geographic origin point: sub-Saharan Africa. The rain snake. This conclusion aligns exactly with what we know about the movement of ancient human populations. The first groups of anatomically modern humans began migrating out of Africa at least 60,000 years ago, following the northeastern corridor through the Arabian Peninsula and the Middle East. From there, populations spread in multiple directions. The southern migration route moved through the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia, reaching Australia at least 60,000 years ago by current archaeological dating. The northern route pushed gradually toward Europe. Much later, populations crossing from northeastern Asia into the Americas brought the inherited tradition across the final major migration. Every group carried their stories. Those stories were the most essential technology they possessed, the accumulated knowledge of every prior generation, encoded in narrative form, because the human brain retains stories more reliably and over longer time frames than it retains raw facts. A story travels with people. A story survives when everything else is lost. The rain snake traveled with every migration, and as it moved into new environments, new evidence shaped it. In regions with catastrophic seasonal flooding, the serpent became a water monster capable of destroying populations. In areas where volcanic activity produced fire from the ground without visible cause, the serpent gained fire. In regions where massive prehistoric bones emerged from hillsides and cliff faces, the serpent gained the specific physical features that those bones suggested. Each culture did not invent its dragon independently. Each culture inherited the oldest story humanity possessed and rebuilt it using the materials its new world offered as confirmation. The Chinese dragon and the European dragon appear to have almost nothing in common at first look. One has antlers and a sinuous, snake-like body and brings rain and prosperity. The other has bat wings, breathes fire, and hoards wealth in mountain caves. But strip away the regional features, the antlers shaped by local fossil evidence, the fire shaped by local geology, and what remains at the core of both traditions is identical: an enormous serpent with supernatural power over the forces that determine whether people live or die. The surface changed across 70,000 years of migration and adaptation. The core survived. The Norse world serpent Jormungandr wraps around the entire ocean, so vast that all human geography exists within its coils. The Babylonian Tiamat is the ocean itself, destroyed to create the sky and the earth. The Australian rainbow serpent carved every river on a continent with its movement. The sand python of the Tsodilo Hills controls rain. These are not separate stories that happen to resemble each other. They are the same story, adapted to different landscapes by people who all descended from the same ancestors and carried the same inheritance. The Tsodilo Hills Cave is at least 70,000 years old. The visual design of dragons in their current popular forms, in films, in games, in fiction, is roughly 1,000 years old in its specific rendering. But the idea beneath every one of those modern designs, the story they are all drawing on whether their creators knew it or not, is one of the oldest things the human mind has ever produced. It crossed every ocean. It survived every catastrophe that ended the civilizations holding it. It passed through every transition from one era of human history to the next. And it continues to be produced, right now at enormous scale, by industries that have no awareness they are participating in a tradition older than agriculture, older than writing, older than the first permanent human settlement anywhere on Earth. Every dragon story ever told carries something in it from that cave in Botswana. From those people standing in the dark with ochre on their hands, performing a ceremony before a stone serpent they understood to hold the difference between rain and drought, between a harvest and starvation, between life and death. That is where dragons came from the oldest fear and the oldest hope that our species has ever shared with one another.